In this video, I will begin a more in-depth study of the guardians themselves.
Out of respect, I will start with Mr. Marabô, who is my personal guardian.
Since an analysis of a guardian can be quite long, in this video, I will only analyze some aspects of his work and the meanings and probabilities of the name's etymology.
I am writing an entire book just about him. In addition to my personal books about the guardians, I might publish this book in honor of him. I obviously cannot talk about the secrets, but there is information that can be made public when researched and analyzed, and I will try to summarize this as much as possible to bring here in videos. I must remember that for us there is no being that is totally good or totally bad. Everyone has free will to choose to be good or bad according to their needs, conditions or interests.
That is why we should not judge people, but judge to what extent we allow their influence over us. What makes guardians different is that their interests tend to be restricted to their areas of activity.
Therefore, Mr. Marabô, directly or through a representative, will have as his main objective the application of justice and power, or empowerment. Whether he is teaching spiritual laws or applying them, he especially applies justice against tyrants, manipulators, ill-intentioned sorcerers and priests and gossipers on the material plane,
and on the spiritual plane against spirits and spiritual beings who do not follow the rules. And these rules can be varied, from a spiritual being who does not keep his word,
to a being who asks for an offering that he does not deserve or should not receive.
However, practitioners recognize that justice is usually applied in a tribal way, that is, cause and effect. However, there is one point. The effects will be the same as those produced by the act, but they will not necessarily occur in the same way or under the same parameters. Let's take an example of a dishonest act that generates undue profit. The person who benefited unduly will not necessarily suffer a dishonest act by another person.
But some event will occur that makes him pay for the damage he caused to the balance of the universe.
And this could be the breakdown of a car, an unexpected expense, or even an illness. And the effect will be equal to what it produced. That is, if the money received unduly was the amount that for the victim would be equivalent to 1 month's work, the damage that the author of the dishonest act will pay will be the equivalent of 1 month's work plus what would be a reparation for the balance. So if the victim went hungry, the guilty party will also go hungry,
because it is the effect that must be matched
on all levels, including the emotional, spiritual, and mental. So if the victim became desperate, the guilty party will also go through an event that will make him despair. If the victim lost everything he had, even if it was little in monetary value, the guilty party will lose everything he has, even if he is a millionaire. But in the same way that if a person does the best he can to help someone, when he is in a similar phase to the person he helped, he will be helped by someone who will do the best he can.
Not necessarily the same person who helped, but someone who will have the same means and will undertake the same efforts.
That is why we say that when an offering is made and there is no money sometimes to give the best drink, but the best one can give, the guardians accept and return according to the intention.
But when there is money and the worst is given due to bad faith,
the guardians will act with the same ill will that the offering was made,
remembering that Mr. Marabô is the Lord of the offerings, who links the effects to the causes.
Starting the analysis.
Mr. Marabô is a respected entity in all Brazilian religions. His name does not have a single origin, and there are several explanations for it.
I will analyze it within the main lines that form the Brazilian religion: its African, native, hybrid, Arab, Jewish, and esoteric origins.
African origins. First, I will talk about the Bantu origins.
One hypothesis is that this name would be a manifestation of the Inquisitor Mavambo,
a deity of the Bantu pantheon, who is linked to the ancestor of the Ovambo people, and who is linked to clay, fire, and ancestors. Considered a conqueror, Mavambo was born from the clay where Unkosi, similar to the Orisha Ogum, laid his head to sleep. For some, this term can mean lightning or spell, and is also a term adopted to designate a person who is dangerous.
Ma refers to Mani, which means king, and Vambu from the Ovambo clan. The name may have its origin in Matamba, which is an African kingdom.
This name also refers to a Bantu wind deity similar to the female Orisha of the Yoruba. The name may also have its origin in the term Ulemba, which is the fig tree, which makes sense since his twin brother, in some traditions,
is Mr. Mango Tree.
Therefore, there are two primordial trees, mango tree and fig tree.
Yoruba origins.
For some, his name comes from the corruption of a Yoruba chant.
Egba Abi Agoma Huba are Egba Kosi. which means I have faith in ESHU and I ask permission to praise him in my home.
I have faith in ESHU. This is true. Others link him with the face of the Orisha ESHU as Igbarub, a face that accompanies Shango,
who is the ESHU Lord of Offerings.
For some the name comes from Ma Eoi Abo, which would mean the one who completely surrounds, the force that totally protects, or even the guardian who watches over.
Native origins. Another explanation is that his name comes from the indigenous tribe
Marabô. These natives through rituals can access secret kingdoms at the bottom of the waters, and they transform their spiritual bodies into alligators.
In this process, the initiates receive secret knowledge directly from their ancestors. Their theology is very rich about the spiritual planes and secret knowledge, so as not to get lost in this process or in what happens after death.
There is also the term Marab, which means son of the foreigner, or son of a miscegenation, hybrid origins.
Here comes the theory of origin in Malungo.
This Bantu term means traveling companion,
and it was the term used for the Africans who came on the same boat. When the Maoris arrived, the Malungo armies were formed.
Africans who freed other Africans through rebellions, and they used to do this by setting fire to sugarcane fields and farms.
In the northeast of Brazil, the ashes of the burning sugarcane fields are called Malungos or Malunguinos, little Malungos. This name gives rise to the entity Malunguinho of the Katim Juruma religion,
which has many aspects similar to Marab.
Malunguinho is a spiritual being who acts as a hybrid, master of the Juruma religion and guardian, holding the key that opens the three worlds.
This spiritual being is even transformed into the guardian Mr. Trunkera Trunk,
because when the religion was prohibited,
the masters performed the consecration of a small trunk, creating the settlement of the entity in this trunk.
And this trunk was close to the door, so that it was similar to a bench. There was no way for a police officer or a curious person to discover that there was a spirit in that trunk. Mr. Trunkero in Umbanda becomes Mr. Trunquera place of the trunk,
which is an entity that presents itself in the face of a Tupinam Indian who protected the temples before the guardians presented themselves as a separate class of spirits. In ancient theologies, it was said that Mr. Trunquera was the eyes of Marab to observe the temples,
both for him to protect and for him to judge the works and priests. Today, the term Trunks Trunquera is the name of the guardian house that is placed at the door of the temples,
which also refers to the curve of the river where trunks accumulate and form a natural barrier that prevents the passage of garbage into the rivers. There is also a connection with the guardian house itself,
since the settlement vases were placed on trunks of specific trees that had a connection with the guardian.
And in the Bantu foundations, tree branches are placed in the settlements. Arab origins. Other people say that its name refers to the Marabouts. These men were teachers of the Arabic language and the use of the Quran and Arabic mysticism.
This term also designates some sorcerers from the West African coast.
Ancient books stated that the spirits
who used this name spoke French, situating a possible origin in Congo-Brazzaville. Even presenting himself as a gentleman, it is recognized that his magic is extremely tribal. The term Muriel can mean terrifying,
and in the face of an entity linked to implacable justice, it is understandable why this is.
Many spirits have a characterization of the Mali Empire, linking them to the Arabs,
remembering that it was the rebellion of the Maoris, that is, the rebellion of the Arab Africans, that gave rise to the groups that would later become the temples of Makamba.
They were also called of Mandingos. Jewish origins.
There is a strong Jewish influence in the northeast of Brazil,
which may give rise to the name
Mará and Ivy, which would mean something like teacher who attacks, strict teacher.
But it can also mean great master.
Mará can also mean revolt, which again connects to the idea of the African Quilombolas,
those who revolted and freed themselves and others.
Esoteric origins. In Buddhism, the term Mará designates the Lord of Illusion who tempts Buddha through desires and attacks. Although in this view it seems like something bad, it is understood that it is a teaching.
If there are no trials, there is no evolution.
But I believe that this energetic face is more associated with another guardian who is also connected to Marab. But for some, it is a face of the same acting in the collection of errors, and for others, it is a different spirit that applies justice to the mind.
For esoteric Umbanda, the name is linked to the original or primordial masculine principle,
whose inversion of one letter gives rise to the term Maria, which would be, in this case, the original feminine principle. There is a strong connection between Marab and Maria Padilha, both Maria Padilha, the Queen, and Maria Padilha of Souls. In practice, But there is no denying his extreme connection with Maria Mulamba in most of his personal aspects. They are extremely similar, including in the way they practice magic. Personally, I believe they are complementary, and there is also a connection between him and Maria Quitria, the warrior queen. Thus, a direct connection is formed with the three Marias, who in some traditions are the superior queens. There are even songs saying that one should call upon the three to appease his fury, because in the act of demanding payment from a defaulter, he can become merciless, and only the three Marias would lessen the impact of this fury on the person. There are also connections between Mr. Marrow and terms and names in grimoires, but I will not talk about these very specific aspects here, for a number of reasons. There are points that should not be explored publicly to avoid confusion.
I must also emphasize that
these translations are not all unanimous. Each tradition adopts one or another interpretation.
this is part 1 of Mr. Marab's analysis. He is one of the most complicated guardians, but I believe it is possible to understand through him how vast the analyses of the essence of the guardians are. In future videos I will talk about other details besides the name, like the way of acting, symbolic stories, personality of the entity and its children mediums.
And then I will move on to other entities.
Remembering that I will not talk about all of them, maybe just about some of the 147 best known. I will put in the description some songs. I hope that you like it.
Hail to the King's 7 crossroads of the lyre, and may my guardian, Mr. Marab, bless everyone.